The history of art is full of stories of gifted artists who died too young. Some are still celebrated, others long forgotten. And against all odds, a rare few are given a second chance to be discovered.
Today is a very special day. We are here at Museum Prose in Toronto, and we are getting ready to release a number of rarely seen Oscar Cahén works for exhibit at Fahili Gallery downtown. Okay, good to go, thank you.
You know, any work of art has no cultural value if it has no audience. And so when work is in storage, it's sad to me. It needs to be shown to people so people can engage with it. And I think Oscar truly believed that that relationship between art and an audience and a viewer had meaning. That's why he made the stuff.
Oscar Cahén was one of the most inventive and influential Canadian artists of the 20th century. He co-founded the renowned group Painters 11 and became a dominant force, both as an illustrator and abstract artist. For the past 6 decades, however, almost all his work has disappeared from public view.
Unfortunately, he did pass away quite young, and the art that we got to see from him was tragically cut short, but what we do have is being brought to light today. So it's a very, very exciting moment for everyone involved, and also for the citizens of Toronto and beyond to get to see the pieces for the first time in years.
After decades in storage, some of his greatest works are about to get their moment in the spotlight again, including his masterpiece, The Warrior.
The Warrior, it's a monumental work. There's something quite staggering about the piece. And we thought, well, this thing can't stay in the warehouse. It's not right. Let's get it on the wall.
The Warrior is a really unique piece. It was the largest piece that Oscar has ever created, truly a masterpiece of Canadian art. And it's something that's so rarely seen. It's very impactful, and we're really, really excited to be able to bring it downtown today to put it on display.
I really wanted to do an exhibition in Toronto. Oscar is from Toronto, lived in Toronto, died in Toronto, and I really wanted to retell that story, represent him within the context of that city and that history. To organize this exhibition at Center Gallery at Fahili Fine Arts, where hundreds of people could see the work, engage with it and think about it and understand who Oscar was hugely satisfying for both myself and for Pat Feely.
Just make sure there's no tape on the face, eh?
Can't believe it's actually here.
It is magnificent. It is so beautifully, beautifully constructed. I'm blown away by it. I can see now much better why it's called The Warrior, because it has that power, that sort of innate power, as if it could, the whole thing can jump off the canvas.
The last time The Warrior was publicly seen in Toronto was in 1957 at the Park Gallery, a showroom run by Pat Feely's father, Bud. The event attracted some of the top players in the Canadian art scene, and the members of Painters 11 all gathered around it as a tribute to Oscar, who had died the previous year.
When it came in, I just had this sense of incredible history, and I've had this feeling that it's kind of come home.
Oh, that'll fit nicely there.
That'd be beautiful there.
Yeah, color.
To have the work come out of storage after all of these years, with the goal to reintroduce him to the Canadian public and to collectors, it's fun. And it's interesting, and he's deserving of it.
I think Oscar Cahén definitely deserves to be better known because he had such an unusual life.
Born in Copenhagen in 1916, Oscar took to art at a very young age. His father, Fritz Max Cahén, was an art historian and journalist who moved the family around a lot for work, and Oscar absorbed the European culture in like a sponge. Eventually, the family settled in Dresden, where a teenaged Oscar already showed flashes of brilliance as an art student.
The very fact that you could get into the Dresden Kunstakademie at 15 means you're talented.
With the rise of Hitler, Fritz Max, who was Jewish, became a fierce anti-Nazi activist and worked as a spy for the resistance. Over the next few years, Oscar and his family lived life on the run, as his father, who wrote the book Men Against Hitler, organized underground networks to fight the Nazis.
Oscar's life with his parents in Europe was very unstable because of what was happening in Europe at the time, pre-war, and what his father did for work. Oscar was selling illustrations, he was selling erotic drawings and cartoons to help the family make ends meet. So he was a professional working artist very early on. He was driven to do what he does. I don't think he had much choice. He was born an artist.
Oscar definitely escaped by the skin of his teeth. Oscar actually says at one point that the reason that he can't go anywhere else or back to Germany is because he would be put in a concentration camp. He knew exactly what would happen if he stayed.
Fearing he could be a Nazi sympathizer, Oscar was arrested in England and shipped off to Canada as an enemy alien. He would spend the next 2 years of his life in a POW camp outside Sherbrooke, Quebec.
So that's how Oscar comes to Canada, reluctantly, as a prisoner of war.
Though conditions were harsh, Oscar was allowed to continue drawing while in the camp, and his remarkable talent was quickly noticed.
This illustration here is the very first illustration of Oscar's that's printed in Canada. December 19th, 1942. So when Oscar does this, he's actually still in the internment camp in Sherbrooke, Quebec. The Standard magazine liked what Oscar did. They saw some samples, and this is the first commission that they gave him. So this became key to him getting out of the internment camps because you couldn't get out unless you had a job.
Given a job with the Standard magazine, Oscar was released from the camp and after a 2-year stint in Montreal, moved to Toronto with his newly married wife, Mimi. There, he quickly became one of the country's top illustrators.
You know, he did something like 38 covers for Maclean's magazine. And at the time, Maclean's was the national magazine of the country. Everybody was reading it. And he was making a lot of money and winning awards, and it was his bread and butter.
We look at what he did, and you know, it's with a certain amount of envy because, you know, all those Maclean's covers, you know, the fluidity and the humor, I think, in his work that permeates it. Yeah, and that humor is only possible through mastery as well, right? You can't tell a good joke without the structure being perfect.
By the early 1950s, Oscar was a genuine celebrity, known nationwide for his eye-catching magazine covers and signature alone. He even starred in an ad campaign for television sets.
So there's his big, bold signature that everyone knew from his illustrations, and a quote, "Pictures are my business, and I'm convinced you get a better picture on Crossley TV."
When you look at the design work, it was so hip. The techniques were amazing. I think he was trying to create a new dimension to what people had seen before.
So many of his styles that he uses in illustrating look completely contemporary today. This is an unusual illustration. You can see he's cut something and he's using it to stamp a pattern. This is the kind of innovation that Oscar Cahén was bringing to illustration at the time. Nobody else was thinking to do that. So it's someone threading a needle in the foreground, but yes, that's really weird composition, right? And as we know from his paintings, he's sort of interested in things that reach and stretch and grab and look hand-like or claw-like. So you could read that as pointing towards what he's going to do in the future.
Oscar Cahén was quite famous in his day, both as an illustrator and as a painter. His influence, particularly in the world of illustration and advertising, was huge and touched people in the United States, across Canada, even as far as Europe. He was a real player and an influencer.
As the highest paid and most celebrated illustrator in Canada, Oscar was able to provide Mimi and their young son Michael with a comfortable life. They moved to a large country home north of Toronto and took frequent vacations together. Yet, despite all the money and fame, Oscar never let success go to his head.
It was freedom to do things like have a home in Florida, like have a sports car or two. That was the most gratifying. Being very well known, not so much. It was about having the work respected, having the work enjoyed, and making a mark on the fine art where he poured himself into everything he had.
In 1953, Oscar joined 10 other artists to form Painters 11, an influential group whose goal was to introduce abstract art to the Canadian public. Among its members were luminaries like Jack Bush and Harold Town, yet many say Oscar was their clear inspirational leader.
I think he would have had a galvanizing effect on the Painters 11. I think that's what's becoming clear, is that he was one of those magnetic people that would have had this kind of effect on his peers. He had so much to give, and everyone had so much to learn from him.
Oscar Cahén was, I would say in many respects, the glue that held Painters 11 together, the catalyst that helped it emerge. And for those reasons, I think he is definitely in the pantheon of greats in Canadian art.
Bringing Oscar to light is also a bringing to light of Painters 11. And Cahén is an absolute roadway or an avenue into, one, that period of painting in Toronto, how vibrant and good it was, and how important it was.
He was fearless in terms of how he worked. He had a very unique sense of color. His graphic sense was amazing. And he was fearless in experimentation. I mean, he just went for it.
There's an art form where you don't take the pencil off the page. Right? You can see how fast he did this, right? He often stopped and then went away. But there is a form of art where you just go.
In 1953, he was in 11 exhibitions, and in 54 he was in the same number, if not a few more. He was constantly exhibiting work, and as a result of that, he was influencing people.
I think of him like a hummingbird. He goes from idea to idea very rapidly, so rapidly that you don't notice that he's going from idea to idea.
I absolutely believe that Oscar Cahén was a trailblazer. In a nutshell, Oscar Cahén was the man who, in many respects, brought modern Canadian painting to Canada. He himself opened the doors, opened people's minds, opened people's ideas to a new way of making art and gave them the confidence to do it.
Abstraction and abstract expressionism have often seemed to be pathways to the sublime and thus spiritual in a certain way. And the combination of this abstraction and the traces of iconography left in Cahén's abstracts seem to unite in significant ways Cahén's sense of spirituality and his interest in the iconography, say, of the crucifixion or the religious sufferer.
If you had to pick a theme for Oscar, I would say that it's trauma.
I was welcome to walk into that studio at any time when he was doing his illustrations. But when he was painting, the door was closed. And there was just an understanding, you know, I'm down the tunnel here, don't disturb.
Oscar was very smart. You know, like the smart painter. And I think it shows, it's an intelligence that's there, an artistic and visual intelligence, right? No, he's a master, actually. Really, he really is.
The Warrior is not about joy. It's not about celebration or anything like that. It's a painting of trauma, pure and simple.
I find myself looking at The Warrior and thinking about Donald Trump, I have to tell you, because, you know, this is, it's all braggadocio, you know? So underneath it is this kind of sense of someone who comes across as big and powerful warrior, but is actually this deeply vulnerable, kind of baby-like, somewhat impotent figure with these stubby little arms. And I think, you know, big power always has that kind of vulnerability underneath it. Otherwise, the braggadocio would not be necessary to mask it.
Well, The Warrior is just a great painting. It's, I would say, tragic comic painting, right? It has a sense of humor, exaggeration, cartoonishness, but at the same time, gravitas, you know, wounds and healing, allusions to the struggle of life. It's something that gets your curiosity and imagination working, and you keep coming back to it and seeing different things.
You have this mad, frantic brushwork going on here. You know, you can feel how his arm is moving and how he's engaging and pushing and pulling his own body in response to this. This is really about forces coming together, clashing, and telling us something about being caught between a rock and a hard place.
What is the theme of Oscar's work? Is trauma part of that theme? I mean, everybody was traumatized at the time from the Second World War. I mean, that was the zeitgeist of the day, if I can use that. People were freaked out by what had gone on. And that never left Oscar. There's evidence of that in much of the work. But there's also evidence of joy, a kind of hopefulness that is expressed in the work, particularly through his use of color.
Yes, there was the dark side. It was a theme, and from that comes the light.
let's not go overboard too much about the turmoil and the trauma because there's a lot of fun here too. So there's as much fun in there, in fact, maybe even more fun than there is any other kind of spirit. So let's not pin him down too much. And I think the drawings are part of that too. Like, these are rich in color and they're fun and they're good to look at and they're wonderful drawing, and that's equally Oscar Cahén.
I say this myself as a Jew, that I think that a condition of Jewish life is that there is always a mixture of what I would say the oi and the joy. And I think that is something that we see in Oscar's work continuously. And even in the darkest moments, there is light, there is happiness, there is hope. I think that was something that was a condition of Oscar's life. He was somebody who experienced, witnessed a lot of darkness. And so sometimes that comes out in his paintings in ways that are even frightening, images that are scary. And then as well, there are equally beautiful images of joy, images of great color and vitality.
I think it's just astounding that you can have a painting that's as dark as this painting is, and yet we read it as being entirely about light. Very few painters have that ability to be dark and yet uplifting.
Oscar was a major player, and let's not forget, he was released from the prisoner of war camp in 1942. He died in 1956, 14 years. And within the 14 years, he rises to the top of his profession as an illustrator. He becomes one of the leading founders of Painters 11. That is a very, very short time when you consider the timelines of how the art world operates. It's extraordinary, actually.
On November 26, 1956, Oscar went out to lunch to celebrate the completion of his latest commission, a mural for the new Imperial Oil Building in Toronto.
After lunch, he got in his car and he was heading home to Oakville, and he was hit by a dump truck and instantly killed.
And unfortunately, the only witness, who really that we sort of understand the situation from is the person that he collided with, who was a 16-year-old who was driving a dump truck.
When I picked up that phone, the reporter was shaken, saying, "I've just heard this. Is it true? What happened?"
The family went into shock, and the Toronto art world was in shock and disbelief at what had happened. Oscar's wife, Mimi, Michael's mother, kind of went off the rails.
When he died, she just imploded and also had mental health issues. And so as a result, she alienated the art community. She argued with them, didn't get along with them.
She begins a kind of gypsy life-like existence, moving from one friend's place to another, bringing all this stuff with her, storing it here and there.
I had to step in for my dad and be the adult.
There was just not enough energy and the know-how at the time to maintain a presence of the work in the contemporary art world of the day.
His catalytic impact, the evidence of that kind of died away, and partly because the work was all taken away and put into storage. So we weren't really seeing a lot of Oscar Cahén in Toronto in the 60s and 70s and 80s. So, he's been submerged underwater. So it's definitely the moment for his revival.
With this exhibit, it's almost like giving him a second opportunity.
Absolutely. It gives him an opportunity for people to see, look at his vision, admire his vision, and listen to him speaking to us in a visual way. This is what he's about, and he's about it very well.
they're still fresh and radical. That's the sign of a great work of art, is it remains fresh. It keeps its radicality. So the date on it is not that important in the end. What we need from the painting is the freshness of its vision, its forms, and the way it tells its story. And his paintings have that.
By the age 40, when he died, he had become a huge success in Canada. In a really, really short period of time, he had become one of this country's most influential artists. I would ask, how does one do that out of landing in this country, arriving in this country as a detainee? There would be some that they would allow that experience to perhaps defeat them. Not so with Oscar Cahén, and he became a key figure in defining this country's cultural fabric.
Oscar's best artwork was created already. His future, had we been so fortunate, would have been an exploration of new avenues, but not necessarily better avenues. So it isn't a linear thing. He already did his greatest work.
Oscar is having a huge resurgence. We've placed many paintings in very good collections. We have, I think, educated several generations of people about who he was, who he is, what his work was about, the influence that he had on the scene in Canada at the time. I'm very, very optimistic that as time goes on, Oscar will continue to be celebrated as one of Canada's great artists.